They said the Alpha King's beast feared only one thing: the river. 4 years, no warrior could make him cross it. No command. No battle. No threat. Nothing. Then one stormy night, a healer with no sword, no title, and no army stepped into the cursed water to save a chained child. What happened next stunned an entire kingdom. The beast that refused to cross for years followed her without hesitation. But the river was hiding more than old legends. Slave traders were stealing children. Powerful council members were protecting dangerous secrets. And buried beneath years of lies was the truth behind the greatest loss of the Alpha King's life. As enemies close in and a mysterious bond begins awakening between them, one brave woman may be the only person capable of leading a broken king across the darkness he has feared for years. Because sometimes the strongest alpha doesn't lead the way. Sometimes he follows. And this time the river is only the beginning. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in thin silver lines across the borderlands, turning roads into rivers of mud and washing color from the world. The sky hung low and heavy, a blanket of endless gray pressing down on forests, hills, and forgotten villages. Most people stayed indoors when the weather turned like this. Not because of the rain. Because of what the rain seemed to bring with it. The borderlands were a place where laws faded. Place where good people disappeared and nobody came looking. A place where fear traveled faster than truth. This morning was no different. A long line of wagons creaked through the mud toward Blackwater Ford. The horses looked exhausted. The men walking beside them looked cruel. Chains rattled beneath the sound of rain. Dozens of prisoners shuffled forward with lowered heads. Farmers, villagers, travelers unfortunate enough to be caught on the wrong road at the wrong time. Some had bruises. Some had cuts. Most had simply stopped hoping. One of them was a boy no older than 10. His name was Finn. He walked barefoot through freezing mud, struggling to keep pace with the adults around him. A rusty chain hung from his wrists. Every few moments he glanced toward the trees. Not because he expected rescue. Because children always looked for miracles long after adults stopped believing in them. The trader behind him noticed. The man struck the back of Finn's shoulder with a wooden rod. Eyes forward. Finn stumbled. Pain shot through his arm. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. The trader laughed. "That's better." The other men laughed with him. Finn lowered his head. He had learned quickly that crying only entertained people like them. So he remained silent. That somehow made everything worse. The convoy continued moving toward the river. Toward a future none of the prisoners wanted to imagine. Far from the road, hidden among dripping pine trees, a young woman crouched beside a patch of silverleaf herbs. She should have been focused on her work. The herbs only bloomed during heavy rain. They were rare, valuable, difficult to find. But her attention had shifted the moment she heard chains. Elara slowly stood. Rain soaked the dark braid hanging over her shoulder. Mud clung to the hem of her cloak. Her sharp green eyes followed the movement of the convoy through the trees. At first she thought they were ordinary travelers. Then she saw the chains. Then she saw the bruises. Then she saw the child. A cold knot formed inside her chest. "No!" The word barely escaped her lips. "Slave traders." Again. Her jaw tightened. The borderlands had become dangerous enough. But lately people had been disappearing at an alarming rate. Entire families, children, travelers. Nobody knew where they went. Everyone suspected. Nobody had proof. Till now. Elara watched Finn stumble again. The boy looked exhausted, hungry, terrified. Something about him reminded her of herself years ago. Alone, powerless, forgotten. A feeling she never wanted another child to experience. One of the traders grabbed a woman by the arm and shoved her forward. The woman nearly fell. Finn immediately moved to help her. The trader rewarded him with another strike. Elara's hands curled into fists. Most people would have looked away. Most people would have told themselves there was nothing they could do. Most people would have been right. There were nearly 20 armed men guarding those wagons. She was alone. Healer. Not a warrior. Not a wolf. Not a queen. Just one woman standing in the rain. And yet she couldn't leave. Couldn't pretend she hadn't seen them. Couldn't forget the boy's face. The convoy continued toward Blackwater Ford. Elara waited until they disappeared behind a rise in the road. Then she gathered her herbs quickly. Not because she planned to go home. Because she planned to follow them. Far to the north, another storm was brewing. One that had nothing to do with rain. Inside the stone walls of Greyhaven Keep, warriors stood in tense silence. The enormous chamber felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather. Because of the man standing before them. Alpha King Rowan Blackthorne stared at a map spread across a long wooden table. 6 scouts stood nearby. None looked comfortable. One finally cleared his throat. "My king." Rowan didn't look up. The scout swallowed. The patrol returned from Blackwater Ford. Still no response. The room somehow became quieter. Everyone knew why. Everyone knew what came next. The river remains unchanged. Rowan's expression hardened. Small shift. Barely noticeable. Yet every warrior in the room saw it. Years had passed. The wound remained. "The beast?" Rowan asked. The scout hesitated. Then lowered his gaze. "The same as before." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The scout wished he were anywhere else. The wolves refused the crossing. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Outside, thunder rolled across distant mountains. Rowan finally lifted his eyes. They were the color of winter skies. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous. But beneath that control lived something else. Something older. Something tired. "The river isn't cursed," Rowan said quietly. "No, my king." "Then why do they still refuse?" Nobody answered. 'Cause nobody had one. The truth was simple. The wolves refused because their alpha refused. And their alpha refused because Blackwater Ford carried ghosts. Ghosts with names. Ghosts with memories. Ghosts that waited beyond the water. Years ago, Rowan had crossed that river with someone he loved. She never returned. No body. No answers. Only loss. Since then, his wolf had treated the river as if death itself waited within its currents. Rumors spread quickly among packs. Eventually people stopped questioning it. They simply accepted that even Alpha Kings had limits. Even monsters carried scars. The scout shifted nervously. "There is more." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Speak." "We found evidence of increased movement along the border." "What kind of movement?" "Traders." The room darkened instantly. Not physically. Emotionally. Everyone understood. Traders. The word meant something different in the borderlands. It often meant chains. Missing villagers. Children who never came home. Rowan's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Enough to concern us." The Alpha King stared down at the map again. Rain tapped softly against tall windows. Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Calculation. The scout continued carefully. "They appear to be moving toward disputed territory." "And Blackwater Ford?" "Yes." A muscle shifted in Rowan's jaw. The river again. Always the river. Everything seemed to lead back there. The silence stretched. Finally Rowan spoke. "Prepare riders." Several warriors straightened immediately. The scout blinked. "My king. I want eyes on every road leading to the ford." At once. The room came alive with movement. Orders spread quickly. Men hurried toward exits. Within moments Rowan stood alone. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Steady. Relentless. His gaze drifted toward the distant horizon. Toward a river he hadn't truly faced in years. Toward memories he preferred buried. His wolf stirred uneasily beneath his skin. Not with rage. With warning. The same warning it always gave whenever Blackwater Ford was mentioned. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. He hated that feeling. Hated that something as simple as a river still held power over him. He was Alpha King, leader of the strongest territory in the north, feared by enemies, respected by allies. Yet one stretch of water could still make his chest feel tight. Still make old grief rise from places he thought were empty. Side lightning flashed. For a brief moment the room glowed silver. Then darkness returned. Far away, beyond forests and rain and muddy roads, Elara followed the slave convoy deeper into the borderlands. Finn stumbled through chains and fear. And Blackwater Ford waited silently between them all. None of them knew it yet. Not the frightened boy. Not the stubborn healer. Not the king haunted by ghosts. But before another night passed, the river that had divided their lives for years would begin changing all of them. And it would start with a child who refused to stop hoping. Even when every reason to hope had been taken away. The rain continued through the night. By morning, Blackwater Ford looked less like a river and more like a wound cut through the land. Dark water rushed between jagged rocks, carrying broken branches and fallen leaves downstream. Mist drifted above the surface, turning the entire valley into something dreamlike and unsettling. People told stories about this river. Stories passed from one generation to the next. Some said spirits lived beneath the water. Others claimed the river chose who could cross and who could not. Most dismissed such tales as nonsense. Yet even those who laughed about curses rarely approached Blackwater Ford after sunset. Fear had a way of surviving long after truth disappeared. And nowhere was that fear stronger than inside Alpha King Rowan Blackthorne. His horse stopped several yards from the riverbank. Not because Rowan commanded it. Because the animal sensed his tension. Around him, 6 warriors waited in silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The river roared below. Rowan stared at the water. For a long moment nothing happened. Then his wolf stirred. A low growl echoed inside his mind. Not threatening. Not angry. Uneasy. The same reaction. Every single time. His fingers tightened around the reins. The cold wind pushed against his cloak. Rainwater slid from dark strands of hair. Still he watched the river. Still he remembered. Years had passed. Years. Yet standing here felt exactly the same. Like stepping backward through time. Back to the day everything changed. Back to the day he lost her. A flash of memory cut through him unexpectedly. Sunlight. Laughter. A young woman standing beside this very river. Golden light dancing across the water. The sound of her voice. Then darkness. Screams. Blood. Nothing after that. No answers. No body. Only silence. Rowan shut his eyes briefly. The memory vanished. The ache remained. "My king." One of the scouts spoke carefully. As though afraid of disturbing something fragile. Rowan opened his eyes. "What is it?" "We found fresh tracks." "How many?" "Several wagons." The scout pointed toward muddy ground near the river. "They crossed during the night." A muscle tightened in Rowan's jaw. Crossed. The word irritated him. Not because of the traders. Because of the reminder. Others crossed. Everyone crossed. Everyone except him. The wolf growled again. The sound filled his chest. A warning. Always a warning. Rowan swung down from his horse. The warriors exchanged nervous glances. He rarely approached the water directly. Today he walked all the way to the riverbank. Boots sank into mud. Cold wind struck his face. The closer he moved, the stronger the resistance became. Not physical. Something deeper. Something inside him. The wolf became restless. His heartbeat quickened. His breathing changed. The river seemed louder now. As if it recognized him. As if it remembered. Rowan stopped. Only a few feet remained between him and the water. That was all. Few steps. Simple. Easy. Yet impossible. His wolf refused. The beast pushed against him from within. Not forward. Away from the river. Away from memories. Away from pain. Rowan stared at the current. Frustration burned beneath his calm expression. He was Alpha King, ruler, a warrior, a man capable of facing armies. Yet one river still held power over him. Behind him nobody spoke. The silence somehow made everything worse. Finally Rowan turned away, his expression unreadable. Return to the keep. Relief passed through several warriors. Not because they feared the river. Because they feared watching their king lose another battle against it. Far away, hidden beneath dripping trees, Elara followed the convoy. The slave traders had made camp in a clearing surrounded by forest. Smoke rose from several fires. Guards moved between wagons. Weapons glinted in the rain. Elara crouched behind thick bushes and studied the camp carefully. Her heart sank. The situation was worse than she imagined. Far worse. The prisoners she had seen yesterday were only part of the convoy. Additional cages occupied the rear wagons. Covered wagons. Locked wagons. The kind designed to hide people. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Slowly she moved closer. Careful. Silent. Rain helped conceal her movements. Branches shielded her from view. Nobody noticed the healer watching from the woods. Not at first. Then she heard it. Sound. Weak. Child crying. Elara froze. The sound came from one of the covered wagons. She waited. Another cry followed. Then another. Her chest tightened. Children. There were children inside. Several of them. One wagon shifted slightly. The cloth covering the back moved. For a brief second a tiny hand appeared. Then vanished again. Elara looked away. Not because she wanted to. Because the sight hurt. Because she suddenly understood what was happening. These weren't ordinary prisoners. This was trafficking. Children. Families. Villagers. Sold like property. The realization filled her with anger. Not loud anger. Not reckless anger. The kind that became cold. Focused. Dangerous. A movement caught her attention. Finn. The young boy from yesterday. He sat beside a wagon wheel. Chains still secured his wrists. Mud covered his clothes. His face looked pale from exhaustion. One trader threw a piece of stale bread toward him. The bread landed in the dirt. Several prisoners immediately looked at it. Nobody moved. Not because they weren't hungry. Because they knew what happened when they fought over food. Finn quietly picked it up. Then surprised everyone. Instead of eating it himself, he carried it toward one of the younger children sitting nearby. Little girl. Maybe 6 years old. The child looked terrified. Finn handed her the bread. She stared at him. "Take it," he whispered. "What about you?" "I'm not hungry." The lie was obvious, even from a distance. The girl accepted the bread. Finn smiled. Small smile. Weak. Yet somehow genuine. Elara felt something twist inside her chest. The boy had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yet he still gave away food. Rain continued falling. The little girl began eating. Finn watched her quietly. Then he looked toward the forest. Toward the trees. Toward the exact place where Elara hid. For one brief moment their eyes met. His expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Oh. Teeny. Fragile. Dangerous. Oh. He had no reason to believe someone would help. No reason to believe rescue was coming. Yet somehow he looked at her as though he knew. As though children could sense kindness even from a distance. Elara slowly shook her head. A warning. They come. Don't react. Finn understood immediately. He lowered his gaze. But something had already happened. Connection. Silent. Unspoken. And suddenly walking away became impossible. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the sky. The traders gathered beneath makeshift shelters. Laughing. Drinking. Completely unaware that someone watched them. Elara studied the camp again. Counted guards. Counted wagons. Counted exits. The numbers were terrible. The odds impossible. A sensible person would leave. Report the convoy. Seek help. Wait for soldiers. Wait for warriors. wait for someone stronger. But every hour mattered. Every hour meant the children moved farther away. Every hour increased the chance they disappeared forever. Her eyes found Finn again. He sat in the rain beside the frightened little girl, trying to comfort her, trying to be brave, trying to act older than he was. No child should have carried that burden. No child should have needed that courage. Elara made her decision. Quietly. Completely. She would help them. Somehow. She didn't know how. Didn't know when. Didn't know whether she would survive. But she knew one thing. She could not leave. Not after seeing this. Not after seeing them. Not after seeing him. Far beyond the forest, Rowan rode back toward Greyhaven. Yet even as distance grew between him and the river, unease followed him. Something felt different. Something unseen. The wolf remained restless. Watching. Waiting. As though somewhere beyond the storm, destiny had already begun moving pieces into place. Neither Rowan nor Elara understood it yet. But before another night passed, their separate paths would begin drawing together. And the river neither of them could stop thinking about would soon demand a choice from them both. Night arrived slowly across the borderlands. The rain never stopped, simply changed. The heavy downpour of the afternoon faded into a steady cold drizzle that whispered through the trees and drummed softly against leaves. Darkness settled over the forest. The traders made camp. Large fires burned in the center of the clearing, throwing orange light across wagons, cages, and muddy ground. Laughter echoed through the camp. The guards were drinking, celebrating, acting as if the people chained around them weren't human. As if fear itself was entertainment. Hidden among the trees, Elara watched every movement. She had remained in the forest for hours, waiting, studying, learning. The longer she observed, the more dangerous the situation appeared. There were more guards than she originally thought. More weapons, more prisoners, more children. The sight made her stomach tighten. One wagon near the rear of the camp held at least 4 young children. Another held women who looked exhausted and injured. The traders had organized everything carefully. Too carefully. This wasn't random cruelty. This was business. Terrible realization. People were making fortunes from suffering. The thought disgusted her. She adjusted her cloak against the cold and studied the camp again. Most of the guards had gathered near the largest fire. Alcohol had made them careless. That was the only advantage she had. And it wasn't much. A sudden scream shattered the night. Elara froze. The scream came from the center of camp. One of the prisoners had collapsed. An older man. Weak. Exhausted. A trader kicked him violently. Get up. The man tried. Failed. Another kick followed. Then another. The prisoners lowered their heads. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. The traders enjoyed that. Enjoyed the fear. Enjoyed the helplessness. Finn watched from nearby. Elara saw anger flash across the boy's face. Not fear. Anger. A dangerous emotion for someone so young. The boy started to rise. Immediately a woman beside him grabbed his arm. No. Her voice was barely audible. Finn clenched his jaw. The trader raised his boot again. The old man curled into himself. And something changed inside Elara. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Simply completely. She had spent the entire day hoping for another solution. Hoping soldiers would arrive. Hoping someone stronger would appear. Nobody had. Nobody was coming. The prisoners were alone. And she could no longer wait. The decision settled over her like calm. Strange. Considering how frightened she felt. Because she was frightened. Terrified. Only a fool wouldn't be. But courage was rarely the absence of fear. Sometimes courage was simply refusing to abandon someone, even while afraid. Elara quietly moved deeper into the trees. Away from the camp. Toward the rear wagons. Toward the children. The darkness helped conceal her. Rain softened her footsteps. Branches hid her movements. She became little more than a shadow moving through shadows. The rear guard sat beneath a canvas shelter drinking from a bottle. His attention remained fixed on the campfire. Not the prisoners. Not the woods. Perfect. Elara slipped past him. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The nearest wagon smelled of damp wood and rust. She carefully approached. Inside, frightened eyes stared back at her. Children. 5 of them. One little girl immediately covered her mouth to stop herself from speaking. Elara pressed a finger to her lips. A silent request. The children nodded. Hope appeared in their eyes so quickly it almost hurt. Carefully, Elara examined the lock. Simple. Crude. Difficult but possible. She removed a thin metal tool from her pouch. Normally she used it while preparing herbs. Tonight it would serve a different purpose. The lock resisted. Seconds passed. Then another. The children watched. Silent. Waiting. Finally. Blick. The sound seemed impossibly loud. The lock opened. Relief rushed through her. The children stared. Almost unable to believe it. Elara whispered softly. When I tell you, run into the forest. The smallest girl trembled. What if they catch us? Elara looked directly into her eyes. They won't. She wasn't certain. Not even close. But children needed confidence. Not fear. The girl nodded. A second wagon waited nearby. Then a third. Each one contained more prisoners. More frightened faces. More people who had nearly forgotten what hope felt like. One by one, Elara began unlocking them. The process felt endless. Every second increased the risk. Every sound made her heart jump. Several times she thought she heard approaching footsteps. Several times she nearly fled. Yet she kept going. Because every new lock that opened revealed another pair of grateful eyes. Another family. Another child. Another life. Eventually she reached Finn. The boy stared at her through the darkness. For a moment neither spoke. Then Finn smiled. Tiny smile. As though he knew this would happen. As though some part of him had never stopped believing. You came. The words were barely a whisper. Elara swallowed. Yes. Finn looked toward the other prisoners. They'll hurt you. Probably. The boy blinked. Apparently that wasn't the answer he expected. Elara fought back a smile. Can you walk? Finn lifted his chained wrists. I can run. Despite everything, the response nearly made her laugh. Instead she knelt beside him. The chains were more complicated than the wagon locks. Rusty. Heavy. Stubborn. The key hung from a trader's belt somewhere near the fire. There wasn't enough time. Elara examined the restraints carefully. Then spotted a weakness. The chain connecting them. Not the cuffs. Chain. A sharp stone lay nearby. She grabbed it. Hit the rusted metal once. 3 times. The chain snapped. Finn stared. His eyes widened. So that's how we're doing this. Elara finally smiled. That's how we're doing this. The boy stood. His legs shook slightly. But determination burned in his eyes. For someone so young, he had already survived far too much. A shout suddenly echoed across the camp. Both of them froze. A trader stumbled toward one of the wagons. Drunk. Angry. Then he stopped. Confused. The empty wagon door swung slowly in the wind. The trader blinked. Looked again. And screamed. The prisoners! Everything exploded into chaos. Shouts erupted everywhere. Men grabbed weapons. Torches moved through darkness. The camp transformed instantly. Fear spread among the traders. Hope spread among the prisoners. Run! Elara shouted. The forest came alive. People scattered in every direction. Children sprinted between trees. Women pulled family members through the darkness. Guards chased shadows. Torches bounced wildly. Confusion swallowed the camp. Finn grabbed the hand of the little girl from earlier. Come on! The child followed immediately. Elara moved beside them. Branches whipped against her face. Rain soaked everyone. Behind them angry voices grew louder. They went this way. Find them. Don't let them reach the river. The river. Elara's heart sank. Blackwater Ford. Course. The traders feared the river. Everyone did. Most people avoided it completely after dark. Which meant it was the only place they wouldn't expect desperate prisoners to go. A dangerous idea. Terrible idea. The only idea. Finn looked up at her while they ran. Where are we going? The river. The boy nearly stumbled. The cursed river. We don't have another choice. Fear crossed his face. The little girl clung tighter to his hand. Around them other prisoners exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone feared the water. But behind them came torches, weapons, and sometimes the unknown felt safer than certainty. The forest began thinning. The sound reached them first. Water. Loud. Powerful. Endless. Blackwater Ford. The river emerged from darkness like a living thing. Wait. Violent. Terrifying. Several prisoners immediately stopped. No. One woman backed away. We can't. Another shook his head. The river is cursed. The spirits will kill us. Fear spread quickly. The traders' torches appeared behind them. Closer now. Much closer. Panic threatened to destroy everything. Elara stared at the river. The current looked stronger than she expected. The crossing would be dangerous. Perhaps deadly. Yet turning back guaranteed disaster. She looked down at Finn. The boy looked terrified. Absolutely terrified. Yet he still held the little girl's hand. Still protected her. Still stood ready. Something about that gave Elara strength. The traders' voices echoed through the trees. They were almost here. The choice had arrived. A single moment. A single decision. One path led toward fear. The other led toward chains. Elara took a slow breath. Then stepped forward. Toward the river. Toward the darkness. Toward whatever waited beyond the water. And behind her, dozens of frightened eyes watched. Waiting to see whether one ordinary woman truly intended to cross the river no one else dared touch. The river roared like a living thing. Cold black water crashed against jagged rocks and surged through the darkness beneath the storm-filled sky. Mist drifted above the surface, turning Blackwater Ford into something almost unreal. Behind Elara, frightened prisoners stood frozen. Ahead of them waited the river. Behind them waited the slave traders. For a moment nobody moved. The world seemed suspended between two terrible choices. The torches were getting closer. Voices echoed through the forest. Angry. Violent. Hungry. They can't have gone far. Spread out. Find them. Finn tightened his grip on the little girl's hand. The child was trembling so badly she could barely stand. Several adults exchanged frightened looks. One man stepped backward. I can't do this. Another shook his head. The stories are true. The river kills people. Fear spread through the group like fire through dry grass. Elara understood. She was afraid too. The current looked powerful enough to sweep away a grown warrior. The water was freezing. The darkness hid whatever dangers waited beneath the surface. But none of that changed reality. The traders would show no mercy if they were captured. Elara slowly turned toward the prisoners. Rain slid down her face. Her voice remained calm. Look behind you. Nobody moved. Look. Several finally obeyed. Torches flickered through the trees. Much closer now. The little girl beside Finn started crying softly. Elara knelt beside her. The child immediately buried her face against Elara's shoulder. It'll be okay. The girl shook her head. No. It will. What if the river takes us? Elara looked toward the rushing water. Then back at the child. Then we'll fight. The little girl blinked. Elara smiled gently. That's what brave people do. The child stared at her. Slowly the crying stopped. Not because she wasn't afraid. Because someone else wasn't running from fear. Sometimes courage spread. Just like panic. Finn stepped closer. His voice was quiet. You really think we can make it? Elara looked at him. For a moment she saw something remarkable. Not weakness, not helplessness, strength, the kind that survives impossible things, the kind that keeps going, even after the world has given every reason to quit. She nodded. Yes. The answer came easily. Not because she believed success was guaranteed. Because she believed giving up wasn't an option. Finn swallowed, then nodded. The boy turned toward the others. If she can do it. His voice shook slightly. So can we. The words surprised everyone, including him. But something shifted. The prisoners looked at one another. Oh, teeny, fragile, dangerous, yet growing. A shout erupted nearby. There! One of the traders had spotted movement. The chase was over. The decision had arrived. Lara stood. Without another word she stepped into the river. The water hit her legs like ice. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. The current pushed immediately. Strong. Relentless. Trying to pull her sideways. Trying to knock her down. The cold was almost unbearable. Yet she kept moving. One step. Then another. Behind her came silence. Everyone watched. The rain fell. The river roared. And Elara continued forward. Finn stared. The boy's eyes widened. She wasn't hesitating. Wasn't turning back. She was actually crossing. Something inside him ignited. A feeling he hadn't felt in days. Maybe longer. Oh, real hope. Without warning he stepped forward. The freezing water swallowed his boots. The little girl clung tightly to him. Several prisoners gasped. Others followed. And more. And more. Suddenly dozens of people were moving into the river. Not because they trusted the water. Because they trusted the woman walking ahead of them. Back in the forest, the traders burst through the trees. Their leader stopped abruptly. What are they doing? Nobody answered. The sight seemed impossible. The prisoners were entering Blackwater Ford. At night. During a storm. The trader cursed. Stop them! Several guards rushed forward. But none willingly entered the water. Fear crossed their faces. The old stories had reached them too. One man refused entirely. I'm not going in there. Another stepped back. The hesitation bought precious seconds. Elara pushed deeper into the river. The water reached her waist. The current became stronger. Every step felt like a battle. Finn struggled behind her. The little girl nearly slipped. He grabbed her instantly. Careful! She nodded. Tears mixed with rainwater. The crossing became harder. Several adults stumbled. Others helped them. Nobody wanted to leave anyone behind. The strange thing was that fear no longer felt overwhelming. Not because the danger disappeared. Because everyone was facing it together. Far away on the opposite shore, another group watched. Alpha King Rowan sat atop a dark horse overlooking the river. He had returned. Something about Blackwater Ford refused to leave his thoughts. The unease from earlier had followed him throughout the day. Eventually he stopped fighting it. Now he stood beside the river once again. Watching. Listening. Trying to understand why his wolf remained restless. Then he saw movement. His eyes narrowed. People. Crossing the river. At night. During a storm. The sight immediately captured his attention. His warriors exchanged confused looks. My king. One scout sounded stunned. Rowan didn't answer. His focus remained fixed on the figures struggling through the water. One figure in particular. Woman. Dark hair soaked by rain. One hand extended toward frightened children. Moving forward despite impossible odds. Something about her felt different. He couldn't explain why. Couldn't understand why his attention refused to leave her. Yet he kept watching. The wolf inside him suddenly became silent. Completely silent. Rowan frowned. That had never happened before. Especially near the river. Normally the beast became agitated. Angry. Defensive. Instead it was simply watching. The sensation felt strange. unfamiliar. Across the river, Elara nearly lost her footing. A powerful surge slammed against her legs. For one terrifying second she thought she would fall. A hand grabbed her arm. Finn. The boy held on with surprising determination. "You okay?" Elara stared. Despite everything happening, he was worried about her. The realization almost made her laugh. "I'm fine," he nodded, then immediately focused on helping the little girl. The child was shivering violently. The crossing had become brutal. But they were close now. Very close. The opposite shore seemed only yards away. Behind them the traders grew desperate. Several finally entered the water. Immediately one lost his footing. The current swept him downstream. The others backed away in panic. Fear exploded among them. Suddenly Blackwater Ford felt real again. Not as a story. Not as a legend. As a force of nature. One that obeyed nobody. Rowan continued watching from the opposite bank. The mysterious woman finally reached shallow water. She looked exhausted, barely able to stand, yet she immediately turned around, checking every child, every prisoner, making sure everyone survived. Not herself. The sight struck him unexpectedly. Most people save themselves first. He didn't. His wolf remained focused on her, watching, waiting, interested. For the first time in years, the river no longer held Rowan's attention. She did. The realization unsettled him. A strange feeling moved through his chest. Not recognition. Not understanding. Something far less clear. Something beginning. Across the water, the last of the prisoners climbed onto the opposite shore. Several collapsed from exhaustion. Others cried openly. Children hugged one another. The little girl clung tightly to Finn. For the moment, Elara finally allowed herself a breath. One breath. One tiny moment of relief. Then she heard something. A sound unlike the river. Unlike the storm. Unlike the wind. Horse hooves. She slowly looked up. And through the rain she saw them. Warriors. Powerful warriors. Waiting on the shore. And at their center sat a man whose presence seemed larger than the storm itself. Silent. Watching her. Alpha King Rowan Blackthorne. The most feared ruler in the Northern Territories. The man whose wolf refused to cross Blackwater Ford. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke. The rain continued falling around them. The river roared behind them. And somewhere deep inside Rowan, his beast stirred for the first time that night. Not with fear. Not with anger. But with a single undeniable command. Follow. Morning arrived slowly over Grey Haven. For the first time in days, the rain had weakened. Thin clouds drifted across the pale sky while sunlight occasionally broke through, casting silver light across the stone walls of the Alpha King's capital. The city was already awake. People filled the streets. Merchants opened stalls. Children ran through muddy alleys. Workers moved between buildings. Yet all attention seemed focused on one thing. The rescued prisoners. Word had spread quickly. Everyone had heard the story. A group of captives had escaped the slave traders. Children had been saved. The Alpha King's warriors had returned with survivors. And somehow Blackwater Ford had become part of the story. The city buzzed with rumors. Inside the castle courtyard, dozens of former prisoners gathered beneath blankets and temporary shelters. Healers moved among them. Food was distributed. Warm drinks were offered. For many, it was the first time in weeks they had felt safe. Finn sat quietly near one of the courtyard walls. A thick blanket rested around his shoulders. The little girl he had protected during the escape sat beside him. For the first time since Elara met her, the child was smiling. Small smile, but real. Finn noticed immediately. "You look different." The girl blinked. "What do you mean?" "You smiled." The little girl touched her face. As though she had forgotten how. Then she smiled again. A little wider this time. Finn felt something warm settle inside his chest. The feeling surprised him. After everything they endured, seeing someone happy felt strange. Almost unfamiliar. Nearby, Elara helped distribute food. She had slept very little. Most of the night had been spent treating injuries and comforting frightened children. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Yet she ignored it. There would be time for rest later. At least that was what she kept telling herself. A shadow suddenly appeared beside her. Elara looked up. Alpha King Rowan stood there. The courtyard seemed quieter whenever he entered it. Not because he demanded silence. Because his presence naturally commanded attention. Powerful. Controlled. Everything about him radiated authority. Yet today something felt different. His gaze moved across the rescued prisoners. Across the children. Across Finn. There was something softer hidden beneath the usual restraint. Something most people probably missed. Elara didn't. "You're supposed to be resting," Rowan said. His voice was calm. "Whoa, Teddy." Elara almost laughed. "So are you." For a second neither spoke. Then Rowan surprised her. A faint smile appeared. Teeny. Brief. Gone almost immediately. Yet it existed. And somehow that felt significant. Before Elara could say anything else, shouting erupted near the main gates. The atmosphere changed instantly. People turned. Guards moved toward the disturbance. Rowan's expression hardened. The Alpha King began walking before anyone explained. Elara followed, curiosity pulling her forward. Beyond the gates waited several large wagons. The slave traders' wagons. Recovered during the night. Broken. Damaged. Covered in mud. The sight alone was enough to make many survivors uneasy. Several former prisoners visibly recoiled. Children moved closer to adults. Fear returned like an old wound reopening. Rowan studied the wagons silently. Then his gaze settled on the chains hanging from one side. Rusty metal. Heavy restraints. Symbols of everything those people had suffered. Something dark flashed behind his eyes. Not rage. Something colder. A decision. He turned toward his captain. "Bring them to the square." The captain frowned slightly. "My king." "All of them." Understanding slowly appeared. The captain nodded. Immediately. Within an hour the entire city had gathered. The central square overflowed with people. Citizens lined rooftops. Children sat on walls. Merchants abandoned stalls. Nobody wanted to miss whatever the Alpha King planned. At the center of the square stood the slave wagons. Broken. Only. Silent. The chains remained attached. Visible to everyone. Reminder. The rescued prisoners stood nearby. Finn among them. Elara watched from the front of the crowd. Curious. Concerned. Rowan stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. No speech came immediately. The Alpha King simply looked at the wagons. Then at the people. Then at the survivors. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the entire square. "Fear survives when people allow it." Silence answered him. "These wagons traveled our borders for years." His gaze moved toward the chains. Too many people looked away. Nobody argued. 'Cause it was true. We told ourselves the victims were strangers. The square remained silent. We told ourselves it wasn't our responsibility. Few heads lowered. Rowan's voice hardened. "No more." The words struck like thunder. Simple. Powerful. Absolute. The Alpha King stepped toward the nearest wagon. He grabbed one of the chains. Without hesitation he ripped it free. The metal crashed against the ground. The sound echoed across the square. Something emotional moved through the crowd. Something difficult to explain. The beginning of release. One by one the remaining chains were torn away. Some by Rowan. Others by his warriors. Soon a massive pile of chains lay in the center of the square. The survivors watched quietly. Many with tears in their eyes. Finn stared at the pile. Unable to look away. Those chains represented nightmares. Hunger. Fear. Pain. Everything he wanted to forget. Rowan raised his hand. A torch was placed into it. The entire city watched. The Alpha King looked toward the rescued prisoners, toward the children, toward Finn. Then he threw the torch. Fire erupted instantly. Flames raced across the wood. Smoke rose toward the sky. The wagons burned. The chains glowed red. Crackling sounds filled the square. People watched in silence. Some cried. Some smiled. Some simply stood there absorbing the moment. For the first time, many survivors truly believed they were free. Beside the fire, Finn wiped his eyes quickly, trying not to cry. The little girl noticed. "You okay?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The child gently squeezed his hand, and somehow that made everything harder. Tears finally slipped down his face. Not from sadness, relief. The kind that arrives after surviving something terrible. Across the square, Elara watched Rowan. The flames reflected in his eyes. He wasn't watching the fire. He was watching the people, making sure they felt safe, making sure they understood. The realization lingered. For all his strength, for all his power, the Alpha King cared deeply about those under his protection. That mattered. More than titles. More than crowns. More than fear. Unfortunately, not everyone approved. As the fire continued burning, several council members gathered near the edge of the square. Their expressions were grim, unhappy, concerned. One elderly councilman stepped forward. "My king." The atmosphere shifted immediately. Rowan turned. "What is it?" The councilman glanced toward the burning wagons. "You crossed into disputed territory." Murmurs spread through nearby listeners. The councilman continued. "You acted without council approval." Rowan's expression didn't change. "And," the man frowned, "you risked conflict. You risked war." A tense silence followed. Elara felt anger immediately. War. That was their concern. Not the children. Not the prisoners. Not the trafficking. War. The councilman kept speaking. "There are laws. There are children." The interruption came from Elara. Every head turned. The councilman looked stunned. Elara stepped forward. Her exhaustion forgotten. Her frustration impossible to hide. There were children in cages. Silence. There were families in chains. The crowd listened carefully. "And you're worried about paperwork." Several people nodded. Others murmured agreement. The councilman's face darkened. "You do not understand politics." "No." Elara's voice remained steady. "I understand suffering." The crowd became louder. Approval spread quickly. Rowan watched her. Quietly. Carefully. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself unable to look away. Because once again, she wasn't afraid. Not of slave traders. Not of rivers. Not even of powerful men. And something about that continued drawing his attention. Like a mystery he couldn't solve. Or perhaps one he wasn't ready to solve. As flames consumed the final wagon and smoke drifted toward the sky, the city celebrated freedom. But beyond the celebration, new tensions had begun. Political tensions. Dangerous tensions. And whether they realized it or not, both Rowan and Elara had just stepped directly into the center of them. Several days passed after the burning of the slave wagons. The city slowly returned to normal. At least on the surface. Children laughed again inside the courtyard. The woman Rowan lost. The day she disappeared. The tragedy that haunted him for years. Suddenly nothing looked the same. "What happened?" she asked softly. For a long moment Rowan didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness outside. Finally he spoke. "There was an attack." His voice sounded distant, like someone speaking from inside an old wound. "We believed raiders were responsible." Elara listened carefully. "But..." Rowan's expression darkened. "But the attack never made sense." The memory returned, painfully clear. The screams, the confusion, the blood, the disappearance. Years of unanswered questions. Now, Terrible doubt. What if it wasn't raiders? Rowan asked. The possibility settled heavily between them. Elara's stomach tightened. Someone inside the territory. Someone trusted. Someone powerful. The implications were horrifying. A knock interrupted the conversation. Both turned. One of Rowan's captains entered quickly. His expression looked troubled. My king. Rowan immediately recognized the look. Bad news. What is it? The council. Course. The captain continued. They've called another emergency meeting. Rowan's face hardened. The council had become increasingly hostile over recent weeks, especially after the rescue operation. Several members openly criticized his actions. Others questioned his authority. And now, with Elara uncovering secrets tied to the river, tensions were becoming impossible to ignore. The captain hesitated. There are rumors. What kind? Some council members believe you're becoming reckless. Rowan almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. Challenge powerful people long enough and eventually they call you dangerous. The captain glanced toward Elara. They're particularly unhappy about her involvement. Silence filled the room. Elara wasn't surprised. In their eyes she was a healer, an outsider, someone who should remain quiet. Instead she asked questions that made her inconvenient. Rowan looked toward the captain. You may go. The man bowed and left. The library became quiet once more. Only rain and distant thunder remained. Elara exhaled slowly. I'm causing problems. No. Rowan's answer came instantly. She looked at him. The Alpha King held her gaze. For several seconds neither looked away. Then Rowan spoke. You're uncovering them. The distinction mattered. More than either expected. Something warm moved through Elara's chest. Not because of the words. 'Cause he meant them. Across the castle, another small discovery was unfolding. Finn sat near a window reading one of his library books. The little girl slept nearby. The castle had begun feeling like home. Strange thought. Yet a comforting one. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. And somehow that mattered. Back in the library, Rowan closed the final journal. The evidence was undeniable. The river had never been cursed. Someone had built the myth. Someone had benefited from it. And somewhere beneath those lies waited the truth about the day Rowan lost everything. The Alpha King stared into the candlelight. Something had changed. Not just politically. Personally. For years he carried grief like a chain around his neck. Now that chain felt different. Not lighter, but looser. Because for the first time another possibility existed. Maybe the past wasn't what he believed. Maybe the river hadn't stolen everything from him. Maybe someone had. And if that was true, then the people responsible had spent years hiding behind fear. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. Inside the library, destiny quietly shifted once again. Neither Rowan nor Elara realized how dangerous the truth would become. But both understood one thing. The river was finally beginning to reveal its secrets. And those secrets were leading directly toward the people sitting on the council. The council chamber had never felt colder. Gray morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The air itself seemed tense, as though the walls understood that something important was about to happen. At the center of the room stood Alpha King Rowan. Silent, watching. Around him sat the council members who governed the territory. Men and women who claimed to protect the people. Yet lately, Rowan had begun seeing them differently. Not as protectors, as obstacles. The discovery about Blackwater Ford had shaken everything. And now the council wanted answers. One elderly councilman rose from his chair. His expression was hard, disapproving. My king, your recent decisions have endangered this territory. Several council members nodded. Rowan remained silent. The man continued. You crossed into disputed lands without approval. You destroyed property. You ignored council authority. The accusations echoed through the chamber. Yet nobody mentioned the children. Nobody mentioned the prisoners. Nobody mentioned the slave traders. Elara stood near the back of the room, listening, watching. The omission made her angry. A younger council member leaned forward. The people respect you, Rowan. But emotion cannot govern a kingdom. Finally Rowan spoke. His voice remained calm. Saving children is now considered emotional. Silence followed. Uncomfortable silence. Several council members exchanged glances. The younger man frowned. That isn't what I said. It is exactly what you said. The room grew tense. Across the chamber, Finn sat quietly beside one of Rowan's guards. The boy had never seen so many powerful people gathered together. And somehow they frightened him more than the slave traders. Because these people smiled while discussing suffering. That felt worse. Then another council member stood. A man Elara immediately distrusted. We should discuss the child. Every eye turned toward Finn. The boy stiffened. Fear flashed across his face. The councilman continued. His presence has become symbolic. Rowan's expression darkened. The man didn't notice. Many citizens sympathize with him. His story influences public opinion. Elara felt sick. They weren't talking about Finn as a child. They were talking about him as a tool, a weapon, political advantage. The realization disgusted her. Before anyone else could speak, Elara stepped forward. No. The word cut through the chamber. Several council members looked shocked. The councilman frowned. Excuse me. He's not a symbol. Elara pointed toward Finn. He's a child. The room became silent. He survived chains. He survived traffickers. He survived things no child should ever experience. Her voice grew stronger. And now you're discussing him like he's part of a negotiation. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Because the truth carried weight. Finn stared at her from across the room. For the first time since entering the chamber, he stopped looking afraid. The councilman opened his mouth, then closed it again. Rowan watched Elara carefully. Once more she stood alone against powerful people. Once more she refused to back down. And once more something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough. Enough to make him realize that every important change in his life lately seemed to begin with her. Outside the chamber windows, storm clouds gathered above Grey Haven. Inside, the council's control was beginning to crack. And everyone in the room could feel it. The river looked different in the morning light. For years it had existed as a scar across Rowan's life. Reminder. A wound. A place connected to grief and unanswered questions. Now, as sunlight shimmered across the flowing water, it seemed strangely peaceful. The storm had finally passed. Only the sound of the current remained. Elara stood near the riverbank, watching the water move around smooth stones. She had not expected Rowan's message. Simple request. Meet me at Blackwater Ford. Nothing more. Yet somehow she knew this moment mattered. Footsteps approached behind her. A turn. Rowan emerged from the trees alone. No guards. No warriors. No council. Just him. For several seconds neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. The kind that no longer needed explanation. Rowan stopped beside her. His gaze settled on the river. I used to hate this place. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. Elara looked toward the water. I know. A faint smile touched his face, then disappeared. The Alpha King stood silently for a long moment, gathering thoughts, gathering courage. Something far more difficult than facing enemies. Finally he spoke. The day I saw you crossing this river. His eyes remained on the water. Something happened. Elara felt her heartbeat quicken. Not from fear. From certainty. Because she had felt it too. The strange connection. The unexplained calm. the invisible pull that seemed to exist whenever they were together. Rowan exhaled slowly. My wolf followed you. The words hung between them. For years it refused to cross. His gaze finally met hers. But it followed you. Neither looked away. The river rushed quietly beside them. The world seemed to narrow. Just the two of them. Just this moment. I thought it was confusion, Rowan continued. Then I thought it was curiosity. A small laugh escaped him. I was wrong. Elara smiled softly. The realization had been growing for weeks. Neither wanted to rush it. Neither wanted fate to decide everything for them. What existed between them was already real. The bond was simply a name for something they had built themselves. You protected strangers, Rowan said. You challenged the council. You stood in front of fear and kept moving. His expression softened. And somewhere along the way, you became the first person who made this river feel different. Emotion tightened Elara's chest. Not because of destiny. Because of honesty. Because this was Rowan speaking without walls. Without armor. Without restraint. She stepped closer. The distance between them disappeared. I don't care what the bond says. Her voice was gentle. I chose you before I understood it. Something shifted in Rowan's eyes. Relief. Warmth. Ease. The kind he had searched for since the day he lost everything. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Easily. As though they had always belonged there. Together they turned toward the river. The same river that once represented loss. The same river that once ruled Rowan's fears. And side by side, they stepped into the shallow water. Not because they needed to prove anything. But because neither was afraid anymore. For the first time in years, Rowan crossed Blackwater Ford willingly. And this time he wasn't alone. Spring arrived fully in the borderlands. The cold winds of winter had finally retreated beyond the mountains, leaving behind fields covered in wildflowers and valleys painted in shades of green. Birds returned to the forests. Rivers flowed freely. Villages once separated by fear and distance slowly came back to life. And nowhere was the change more visible than at Blackwater Ford. For years the river had been a symbol of division. Place people feared. A place surrounded by rumors and lies. Now merchants crossed it every day. Children played near its banks. Travelers stopped to rest beneath the willow trees growing beside the water. The curse was gone. Or perhaps it had never existed at all. Only fear had existed. And fear had finally lost. Morning sunlight danced across the river as Rowan stood alone on a hill overlooking the valley. The view stretched for miles. He could see the crossing, the bridge, the distant roads connecting neighboring territories. And the people, so many people, living, laughing, moving forward. The sight filled him with something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Pride. Not pride in himself. Pride in what the people had become. The kingdom felt stronger, kinder, safer. A soft breeze moved through the grass. For a moment Rowan simply stood there, watching, thinking, remembering. A year ago this same view would have felt different. Back then he could barely look toward the river without feeling the weight of old memories. The grief, the guilt, questions. Now those emotions no longer controlled him. They still existed. Some wounds never disappeared completely. But they no longer ruled his life. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. There you are. Rowan turned. Elara climbed the hill carrying a basket of herbs. Sunlight caught her dark hair. A smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The simple sight of her still had an effect on him. Not the overwhelming pull of destiny. Something quieter. Something deeper. She reached the top of the hill and stopped beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them had become one of their favorite things. Comfortable. Easy. A silence that needed no explanation. Together they looked out across the valley. The river shimmered below. Elara smiled softly. Still staring at it. Rowan nodded. Every chance I get. She laughed. You spent years avoiding it. I know. And now you won't stop looking. The Alpha King shook his head. Strange how life works. Elara reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Neither thought about it anymore. The gesture had become part of them. Simple, natural, permanent. Far below, a loud shout suddenly echoed through the valley. Both looked down. Finn. The boy sprinted across an open field near the river. His boots kicked up dirt as he ran. Several other children chased after him, including the little girl he had rescued months earlier. They were laughing, arguing, competing over some game only children fully understood. Finn pointed dramatically toward a wooden marker. I won. You cheated. I did not. You absolutely cheated. The argument continued, louder and louder. Neither child seemed remotely concerned about who heard them. Elara smiled. Rowan couldn't help smiling too. Watching Finn had become one of his favorite parts of each day. Not because the boy reminded him of responsibility. Because Finn reminded him of possibility. The child who once walked through mud in chains now raced across open fields beneath the sun. That mattered. More than titles. More than politics. More than power. The boy was alive. Happy. Free. Several months earlier Rowan had officially adopted him into his household. The memory still amused him. Finn had stared at him for nearly an entire minute without speaking. Certain he had misunderstood. Certain the Alpha King couldn't possibly mean what he said. Then the realization arrived. Then the tears. Then the awkward attempt to pretend he wasn't crying. Rowan had pretended not to notice. The memory still made him smile. He looks taller, Elara said. He is. You're keeping track. Rowan cleared his throat. I notice things. Elara laughed. The sound carried through the spring air. Warm, bright, alive. The kind of sound Rowan never grew tired of hearing. For a while neither spoke. The valley stretched before them. Peaceful. Beautiful. Then Elara's expression softened. You know, she said quietly, I almost didn't follow those traders. Rowan looked at her. She kept her eyes on the river. I saw them. Her voice remained calm. But I was afraid. The admission surprised him. Elara rarely spoke about fear. I almost convinced myself someone else would help. The breeze moved gently through the grass. But then I saw Finn. Silence settled between them. I couldn't leave. Rowan understood. More than she realized. Because that was exactly who she was. The woman who crossed rivers. The woman who stepped toward danger when others stepped away. The woman who changed everything. He turned toward her completely. For a moment she seemed confused. Then she saw the expression in his eyes. The honesty. The emotion. The certainty. You know, Rowan said quietly. Everyone keeps talking about how I crossed the river. Elara smiled faintly. They do. They have the story wrong. She raised an eyebrow. Oh. The Alpha King's gaze remained fixed on hers. You crossed first. The smile faded from her lips. Not because she was unhappy. Because emotion suddenly tightened her chest. Rowan continued. You crossed when everyone else was afraid. His voice softened. You crossed when there was no guarantee anyone would follow. The breeze moved around them. The valley remained silent. Even the river seemed quieter. And because you did. He paused. A small smile touched his face. I finally did too. Elara felt tears threaten unexpectedly. Not dramatic tears. Not painful ones. The kind that appear when someone understands something important. Something true. She stepped closer. Rowan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Together they looked toward the river once more. Far below, Finn and the other children continued running across the field. Laughing. Shouting. Living. The future. The very thing so many people had fought to protect. The sun climbed higher. Golden light spread across the valley. Across the bridge. Across the roads. Across Blackwater Ford. The river flowed peacefully through the heart of the territory. No longer a symbol of fear. No longer a symbol of loss. A symbol of change. A symbol of healing. And as Rowan stood beside the woman who had changed his life, watching the child who had found a home, he finally understood something that had taken years to learn. The strongest people were not those who never felt fear. The strongest people were those who kept moving despite it. The river continued flowing toward the horizon. The children continued laughing. And beneath the warm spring sun, their story moved forward exactly as it should. Not ending. Simply beginning a brighter chapter.